Hi everyone, it's Niamh here and welcome to my art journaling channel. Today we're going to be looking at creating windows in your art journal, and this is directly inspired by a class I did recently by Dina Wakley called Transparent Layers. So I was really inspired by the class and I wanted to come home and try to do something similar in my own journal with my own products. And I'm very reticent when I'm using my art journal to actually cut into the pages. A lot of the work I do is directly on the page, and I don't cut windows through to see what's going behind it. It's something that I really enjoyed doing while I was doing the class. So first thing I'm doing is prepping my page. I'm using the very large Dina Wakley journal, and I'm using a spread that has 2 cotton rag pages on either side and the craft paper in the middle. And all I've done is, with the gesso, created a really fine layer of gesso. Now you can see when I just put in a piece of paper there with lots of colour on it, that's actually what my inspiration to do this page was. I had some tracing paper which I printed out some of my previous artwork onto, and it came through, so you've got that transparent layer, and I wanted to have some of that peeking through. So to build up my layers, what I'm doing is I've torn out the window, and just with some warm coloured Dina Wakley paints, so I've got tangerine, lemon, fuchsia and magenta, got it really wet, and I've just spread it out all over the pages, spread it out through the window. And now what I'm going to do on this page is use some cool colours. Again, spread it out across the page and then go through the other window. So I'm using lime, turquoise, ocean and peacock, I think, on this page. I'm not being very particular with how it looks, and again making it really wet. Now that's why the gesso is really important, and the gesso just needs to be really thin. I found that's one of the things that I've not been doing correctly. I've been putting down gesso on my pages, but I haven't actually been making it very thin, which has actually been adding to the bulk of the page, and really you barely need any on it. And if you noticed, I used some of the new gel press plate marking tools. It's a very thin plastic and it bends much more easily than a credit card, and it just makes putting on the gesso so much easier. Now what I'm going back and doing, and again that's that piece of paper you can see printed onto tracing paper from my laser printer. So that's the inspiration, that's where the colours are coming from. Why I've used the craft paper in the middle is I'm not very successful with craft paper. I find it bends on me and I don't get the look that I'm looking for with it. So that's why I wanted to use that as the window in the middle to make a sort of frame that I could put the paper in between. What I'm doing now is just with some blackberry, I think. I'm pasting it across the top of the page and then wetting it with water so it's really runny to create the drips and layers coming down. One of the things I found in the class as I was doing this was that I wasn't able to let things dry, and my layers were starting to get a little bit muddy. Now I'm not a very patient person. I like to work all in one go, which is actually why this page takes a little bit of a turn, because I worked on this over a few days and I use my heat gun a lot, which I probably shouldn't do when I'm using acrylic paint. I should be patient and let it dry, but I find when I'm in the mood to work, I just want to work. So I tend to use my acrylic, my heat gun, and I use my paper towel a lot too to sort of mop stuff up. I'm really loving how those drips are looking though, and just the intensity of them, and I don't mind that stuff's going through the page. Now at this stage it does look like a great big giant mess, but that's okay because it's all about making lots and lots of layers. I'm loving the colours on this page. how they're all working together, and putting that purple on really helped pull the pages together. The fact that purple's on both pages kind of ties them together as well. It gives it a sort of a unity that it needed. So in the background as well, while it was really wet, I was putting down some stencils. So I've got the dot patterns in the back, which are from Dina Wakley. These stencils I'm using now are from result.I designs. And what I'm doing is using a really, really thin coating of gesso or white paint, because what I want to do is create a resist. So I'm putting down the white paint, and then I'm going to put some of the dribbles of the paint over the top again, and where the white paint is, it's kind of going to resist it somewhat. So just again to add a little bit of depth to the background. This the stencil on this page too is another result.I designs, which was a much finer stencil, and again just using it for the background. I find when I'm doing my stenciling that using a makeup brush, sorry, not a makeup brush, a makeup sponge is a lot easier, and you get a much finer result. I do also sometimes use the blending tools, but I find I go through a lot of the, particularly using paint with them, I go through a lot of the pads very, very quickly, and it's hard to get replacements here. So I tend to go for the cheap $2 shop and go for the makeup sponges. So again, just creating my background here, working backwards and forwards. Because it's such a thin layer of paint, it doesn't take very long to dry, but I want to make sure it's very dry before I start doing the resist. In making the window, I also chose just to hand tear the window so I could get those layers of torn paper in it, just to give it a more organic almost feel to it. And I've just highlighted a bit with the white paint or the gesso that I had left over. So here I am putting the dribbles back down, and you will see how it's resisting over the white paint in the background. You can sort of see it on the word sing and create down the bottom. So I'm quite happy with how the page is going at the moment. Now, one of the things I struggled with this page, or these pages, is I kind of had an idea. I knew I wanted to use the patterned paper I had from a previous layout in between the window, but I was really loving the backgrounds on both pages too. And while you could see through the transparency or the tracing paper, you couldn't see through it all that much because it was so heavily patterned. So while I was doing this, I was putting in, taking it out, putting it in, trying to make the decisions. And the same with doing the stenciling on this. I didn't really have an idea of what I was doing. So I may have come home from being away to a package of new stencils, and basically I'm just using all of them on this layout and having a go. This is one from the Crafters Workshop, and I absolutely adore it. I think it's more probably a scrapbooking stencil because of the sort of cluster of elements, but it's stuff that you could use individually, and it's just beautiful. I love it. And again with this chandelier one, this is a Vicky Bourdain, not sure how to say it, from America Craft, part of her mixed media range. And again, it's not something I would usually go for, but it just adds so much to this page, having those sort of drop chandeliers coming down the page, and the fact that I can sort of put them in through the window. To be perfectly honest, I probably could have been quite happy just leaving this as is, but you know, typical me, can't leave anything alone, have to keep going, have to keep adding layers. So these are some, again, new stamps from, they're not Carabelle Studio. I'm not sure where they're from actually. They might be Carabelle Studio. So you can see, sorry, going back to this, this is the page that I got so far. The page that I've put in from a previous journal spread works really well with this, but you miss out on seeing that window through to the other page. So what I decided to do was to take a blank piece of tracing paper and to do this reductive technique. So this is a stencil I cut during the class of just a figure, And I'm using night and elephant, so a dark blue and a grey, and blending them together and doing this resist technique so you can see through. And so I've got an actual window to see, and I'm quite liking how it's working. But it was still dull on the other side, so I actually went into the other side as well and repainted that as well. And you can see in the picture that it's sort of starting to wrinkle up a little bit, which I quite liked. It takes on this really funny texture when you paint the tracing paper, and it gets a really crinkly effect, and it sounds beautiful. And it's really strange to say something sounds beautiful, but just having it in my journal and it sort of crackles as I turn the page, I actually really like that. It adds another element to what I'm doing. When I put that into my journal, it really finished it the way I wanted it. It had that beautiful darkness on both pages. Through the figure, even though it's clouded, you can still see some of the artwork from the next page sort of peeking through, so you know that there's something on the next page. And it just sort of added that window effect that I wanted. Even though I absolutely adored the other page that I was planning to put into this journal, in that page, it didn't give me that effect of looking through and seeing through to the other side that I wanted. So I will continue to work out how I'm going to incorporate that page into my work, but at the moment it is a learning curve. So this is sort of getting to the end of making this page, and it's just doing the final putting everything together. As I said before, I didn't really, apart from putting this window in and putting something in the window, I didn't really have a plan of how it was all going to go together. But I had some leftover stamped images that I had from the class that I wanted to use up, and again some new stamps that may have fallen into my basket that I wanted to have a go with as well. So that's what I ended up doing. So at the moment I'm just putting the paper in. I've just measured up where it's going to go so I can see the image where I want it. The double-sided tape I'm using is that red liner tape, which is amazing. It is very, very sticky, and it is ridiculously hard to take off the back tape, which you can see me struggling even with a craft knife. This is sped up like 8 times, and this is how long it's taking me just to take the double-sided tape off, so it's ridiculous. Now all I'm doing is sort of going back and looking at some collage clusters. I've got, again, I don't tend to fussy cut very much. If I can tear something out and leave the torn edges, that's what I tend to do. I really like that look. The sharp edges on pages don't tend to work all that well for me. So all I've done is, with the torn edges, gone back with a archival ink pad and just darkened up the edges. This is another new stamp set from Apster. I'm not sure how to say it either. That's terrible. I should really find out before I do these things. And I've just stamped those in the background. The gold foil you can see there is actually from a set of handmade watercolours that I received recently. They're wrapped up in these beautiful gold papers. They look like little lollies, so I wanted to use that gold in there too, and it really sort of adds a pop of colour to the page and pulls those beautiful golden tones from the background. These loose sketched females are another Dina Wakley stamp, and I love them because they fit in really nicely with the other pages, and I like the fact that you can sort of stamp them over that collaged cluster and have a look of a hand-drawn image there as well. And it just ties the coloured focal point back into the rest of the page. Because they're very loose shape, you can sort of build them up into each other and overlap the lines, and it still looks like part of the overall image. So just in some of the lines where they didn't come through all that well, I've gone back with the Stabilo All Pencil just to darken them up somewhat. And then on this page, I'm going to do something similar. So again, building up some sort of collaged cluster. Now I didn't have an image to use on this page, so I'm going through my stamp set to find one, and I've just got some watercolor paper here and stamping out the image. Didn't stamp it out all that well because I didn't use a block, so here I am actually using a block, and it's a much better print. Should learn from my own mistakes. And again, just tearing it out. And I'm just adding in some of the handwritten words from the previous set that you saw. And all I've done is just wet my watercolor page and wet the ends of my scribble sticks and dip them in. Now I would suggest, if you're doing this, don't do what I do. I was using really dirty water, so you can see me using my spray bottle now with clean water to go back over the image. But because it was so wet, the paper started peeling and I wasn't loving how the effect looked. So after doing all that, I decided I'm not going to use this image, I'm going to find something else to use. So I got some other images that I had sitting around. These images have actually been coloured with really watered down acrylic paints. So it's a much smoother colouring than the scribble sticks gave me. Again, I'm using some of the foil from the handmade watercolours to just again echo the page on the other side. And I had my cluster sitting there and I wasn't 100% happy with it, but I thought I'll go do something else and I'll come back to it. So I've got some of the collage tissue papers which I've just stuck down with collage medium. I did put down the full quote, but I didn't quite like it, so I peeled it off again while it was still wet, cut it so I've got a strip of words sort of running around the edge, which I much prefer than the big chunky quote. The good thing about the collage medium is it does take a little while to dry, so you do have a little bit of time to move things around if you're not 100% happy with them. What I decided to do, because my other piece of tracing paper that I had was too busy, I decided to use this one. Now, the tracing paper that I've got, they're all scanned images from working pieces of paper I have in my journal. So this piece that you saw me using just now is one that sits in my smaller Dina Wakley journal. So all that sort of little square texture is actually where I've painted through on the burlap, and it's leaked through. And I keep that piece of paper in there and it just looks beautiful with all the different patterns and colours in it. So every so often I take it off to my scanner and scan it, so I've got a copy of it, put it back into my journal so I can keep using it, but I've got a scanned image of what it used to look like. So I decided I wanted to have some of that pattern and colour, but I wanted to again use some of that crinkly tissue in the background. So I used the torsos, cut those out of the tracing paper. To give a little bit more focus to the heads, I put some of that foil behind it, and you can see it just adds that little bit more opacity to the head, so you can kind of see the stamped image and gives it a little bit of colour coming through. It kind of also shows the transparency of the layer that you're gluing down, and certainly in the torso on the far right, you can see the stenciled words showing through where the thigh is. So I'm just gluing these down with liquid glue. I would suggest, if you actually are gluing these down, probably using a glue stick with the tracing paper would work better, because something that's very liquid like that little liquid glue does make it curl. However, when you press it down flat, it's fine. I decided to go back to use that original image that I cut out and coloured, and now in that cluster I actually really like it. I use the words speak your truth over the top from another Dina Wakley set, and again this is another one of her collage papers. It's really important when you're using the collage papers to make sure that you wet the back with the collage medium and the front, and actually really rub it in so the paper goes almost translucent. I see a lot of people sort of glue them down and not do that layer over the top, so you get that very white stark edge on your page, which you may prefer. It is a preference thing, but I personally like to make it look really almost part of the page. So this is going back and just filling up some of the gaps, because apparently I can't have gaps in my work, and it's just random text stamps, and just not stamping them carefully, just having them bits and pieces so it looks really, really grungy. And now all I'm doing is going around my circle with my foosball pen and doing my journaling. And that's the end of the story, really. I really enjoyed doing this page, even though there were some challenges for me, working over a few days rather than just working in one day like I usually do. But I love the colour combinations that happened on this page. I love how sort of I had an idea of how it was going to go. It didn't quite work the way I wanted to, but I'm really happy with the results. And I love that I was able to use things like the foil from the watercolours in it, just to add that little pop of colour. So it's just a lot of building up layers, whether it's the transparent paint, the stencils, the stamping, the collage tissues, using the tracing paper in the background, and using some different materials around my room. I hope you really enjoyed watching this come together. I would highly suggest, if you ever get an opportunity to do a class with Dina, please do that, because she is the absolute master and does an amazing job explaining how all these layers work together. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you got something out of it. If you like this video, please hit the subscribe button, and I will see you next time. Bye.